Welcome to Deep Dive. Today we are taking a deep dive into a stack of your sources, all focused on one specific electric car, the BYD Atto 3.
That's right. We've pulled together quite a mix of material here. We've got reviews from, seasoned car experts who've driven it, plus perspectives from long-term owners, people who've actually lived with the car day in, day out, and even a look at some specific tests and real-world use reports.
Think of this as your personal shortcut to really getting a handle on what this car is all about. We're basically sifting through all that stuff to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge and insights straight from your source stack.
Yeah, and our mission in this deep dive is pretty clear. We're going to unpack the BYD Atto 3. We'll look at its strengths, absolutely, because there are some compelling ones. But like you said, we're going to really dig into its potential drawbacks, especially looking at these points through the lens of someone who might be, new to electric cars and maybe considering the Atto 3 as their first EV.
Exactly. We want to go beyond just the spec sheet and the flashy features to understand what living with this car is actually like. The good and, well, the potentially frustrating bits. Ready? Let's unpack this.
Okay, so based on the sources you've given us, the BYD Atto 3 is an all-electric SUV from the Chinese manufacturer BYD. It's kind of fascinating because BYD actually started life purely as a battery company back in the mid-90s, but they've rapidly grown into this, massive global manufacturer. They make everything from buses and forklifts to passenger cars like this one.
Right, and the Atto 3 is positioned squarely as a mainstream EV, isn't it? Roughly the same size, aiming for the same kind of market as, say, a Kia Niro EV or maybe a Volkswagen ID.4, trying to get that broad appeal.
Exactly. Now, on the outside, the design gets let's say a pretty mixed reaction to the sources. Reviewers often describe it as neat and tidy, sure, but the word generic comes up quite a lot.
Generic, okay. Any comparisons?
Yeah, some mentioned parts looking a bit like a Cupra Born or that VW ID.4. Interestingly, one source even said the general SUV shape reminded them of cars you'd find in video games, like Grand Theft Auto.
Huh, okay.
And you don't get a huge amount of choice with color either. The sources mention a pretty limited palette, just 5 options.
But then you open the door, and the interior is where things take a dramatic turn. This is where reviewers consistently say the design gets a little bit weird or even wild and wacky. It's anything but generic inside.
Oh, absolutely. The sources highlight a couple of distinct design themes here.
Right.
Some see a really clear gym equipment thing going on. The round air vents look like dumbbells. The gear lever is like a kettlebell handle.
Kettlebell handle? Seriously?
Yeah. And even the armrests on the center console apparently look like a treadmill belt.
Right. Okay. And the other theme?
Others pick up on more of an ocean vibe, describing the sweep of the dashboard as like water crashing down and the center console area looking like sand dunes.
It's definitely a choice. A conversation starter, I guess.
And you absolutely cannot talk about the Atto 3 interior without mentioning those elasticated strings on the door bins.
Ah, yes, the guitar string.
Exactly. Multiple reviewers point these out. Designed like actual guitar strings, and yes, apparently you can pluck them and they make a sound.
Right. Unique is one word for it. Might drive you mad, though.
Could do. Depends on your perspective, I suppose.
Okay. Now, before we really sink our teeth into the areas where the sources highlight potential issues or drawbacks, let's touch on some initial positives. These are the things that seem to grab attention first and often make the Atto 3 look pretty appealing, particularly if you're new to EVs.
Right at the top of that list has to be the price point. Across your sources, the Atto 3 is consistently described as competitive, offering good value.
What sort of figures are we talking?
Well, in the UK, prices are mentioned starting around $36K, maybe up to $37.7K. And crucially, this often puts it under that £40,000 threshold, which can unlock certain tax benefits,
That's a big deal. And elsewhere.
Well, one source looked at Singapore, noted it's considered very affordable there, around S160K, including their COE system, that's the permit you need. But the key takeaway is, for many people, it feels like you're getting an EV for the price of a similar petrol car, or maybe even some hybrids. That's a huge draw.
And tied into that price is the standard equipment level, right? Sources say you get quite a lot.
Yeah, even on the basic trims, the sources indicate you get a good amount of kit. Things like heated front seats, adaptive cruise control, keyless entry and start, often included right from the start.
Okay.
And some higher trims even add a big panoramic sunroof, which reviewers seem to really appreciate.
And the interior quality, despite the quirky design.
Surprisingly good, actually, especially when you remember the price. Sources describe materials in the main touch areas as feeling good, nice and solid, using words like leathery and squidgy.
Squidgy, okay.
Yeah. And one long-term owner's feedback after 18 months was really interesting. They reported no rattles, felt the interior had held up really well, didn't feel cheap or mass-produced over time.
That suggests decent build quality then, at least where it counts.
Seems like it. Practicality is generally rated as decent too. The boot capacity is reasonable. Most sources say 440 liters, which is pretty good for this class. One source did mention 555L, but 440 seems more consistent.
Usability, loading lip, seats folding.
Yep, low loading lip makes things easier. Seats fold completely flat. And there's usable underfloor storage too, which is great for keeping charging cables out of the way.
Good. How about rear seat space?
Generally positive for legroom. And the flat floor is a definite plus if you need to squeeze 3 people across.
But, I sense a but.
Yeah, headroom. Reviewers point out it can be tight back there for taller adults, especially because of that standard glass roof.
Ah, okay.
But ISOFIX points for child seats are easy to get to, apparently. And there are some thoughtful little storage spots like phone pockets in the back and decent cubbies up front.
Okay, what about the tech? The infotainment system gets talked about a lot. That rotating screen?
Ah, yes, the party piece. Or gimmick, depending on your view. It's definitely eye-catching. But beyond the rotation, the sources actually highlight how responsive it is, often comparing it to using a good tablet, like an iPad. Smooth. 60 hertz refresh rate, apparently.
High praise. Resolution good too.
Very clear, yeah. And the camera system connected to that screen seems genuinely brilliant, according to the feedback.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Offers 360-degree views, a 3D mode, even a transparent chassis view. Called one of the best camera systems out there. Great for parking.
That does sound good. CarPlay? Android Auto?
Apple CarPlay is generally available, yeah. Though one source mentioned it forces landscape mode and hides the climate controls, which sounds like a bit of a pain. A faff, as they put it.
Yeah, fiddly.
Android Auto is expected via an update, apparently, and the screen's ability to swivel. Some drivers found it genuinely helpful, especially for navigation, letting you pick the orientation.
And the driver display?
That's cleverly mounted on the steering column so it moves with the wheel. Always visible whatever your driving position. Pretty smart.
Okay. And finally, the ride comfort. Around town, specifically.
Yeah, that's noted as a strong point at lower speeds. Described as nice and soft. Does a good job soaking up bumps and potholes. Takes the sting out of city roads.
Easy to drive in the city, then.
Seems so. Steering is light, good for parking and low-speed stuff. Turning circle is decent, too, for tight streets.
Okay, so summing up the positives. Good price, lots of kit, surprisingly decent interior quality, practical enough, flashy tech with a great camera, and comfy in town. Make it sound pretty appealing on paper.
Definitely, especially at that price. But now we shift gears. Let's really unpack the areas where this deep dive reveals potential drawbacks, frustrations. This is where knowing the details becomes really important, particularly if you're coming from a, regular car and aren't used to EV quirks.
And where the long-term owner feedback really comes into its own, I imagine.
Absolutely. So let's start with that driving experience we just praised for city comfort, because the sources consistently note a significant change once you get up to speed.
How so?
While it's soft in town, the suspension gets described using words like busy, bouncy, fidgety at higher speeds, or over multiple bumps. Reviewers talk about it feeling floaty, not settling down properly, like the car is dancing around on the road surface.
Right, that doesn't sound very comfortable for longer journeys or faster A roads.
Exactly. It can really impact comfort levels. And related to that bouncy ride is the handling, the overall feel. This is definitely not described as a driver's car in your sources.
Okay. Steering stays light.
Yeah, almost artificially light, even at speed. And apparently it can even kick back quite aggressively if you push it near the limits of grip. Not confidence-inspiring.
And body lean.
Noticeable, yeah. When you corner with any sort of enthusiasm.
And I think you mentioned something about feeling disconnected.
Yes, several sources highlight that. A feeling of disconnection through the controls. There's a reported delay, both when you lift off the accelerator for regen braking and when you get back on the power.
Like a lag.
Yeah, it makes it feel remote, as one reviewer put it. Memorably described as like steering the Mars rover.
Wow, okay. Not ideal.
The general feeling seems to be there's just no encouragement to drive it quickly. You don't feel connected to what the car's doing.
And how does it compare to rivals in handling?
Well, one source explicitly stated that a key rival, the MG4, is definitely better to drive.
Right. Okay, let's move on to range and charging. Crucial EV stuff, what are the numbers saying?
Well, the official figures cited are around 260 miles in one test. or 420, 565 kilometers combined city highway in others.
What real world?
That's where it gets less impressive. Reviewers found real-world ranges closer to maybe 190 miles in one UK test average, or perhaps 215 miles in a warm summer test.
And the long-term owners, what did they find?
Well, one owner in a warm climate reported getting around 420 kilometers, which is about 260 miles. So that aligns okay with the lower official figures in good conditions.
But when...
Yeah. That same owner saw a big drop, reported sub 200 miles, getting only about 180 miles in very cold conditions, which, based on their experience, made them question how effective the standard heat pump is in really freezing weather. Something to consider if you live somewhere cold.
And compared to rivals like the Kia Niro EV.
Those real-world figures, especially the winter one, can be less than what you might get from some competitors.
Okay. And charging speed, how fast can it charge?
This is another area highlighted as a potential limitation. DC fast charging peaks at 88 kilowatts. One source said 80 kilowatts, but 88 seems the accepted figure.
And is that slow?
Compared to many rivals around this price point now, yes. Yeah. Reviewers widely call it slow, disappointing. Many competitors offer 130 kilowatters, 150 kilowatts, sometimes even more.
So what does that actually mean for charging stops?
It means longer waits at public fast chargers. Getting from 10 to 80% is reported to take around 45 minutes, or maybe 20-80%, about half an hour if you hit that peak speed.
So on a road trip, if you need a couple of charges,
those longer stops add up. It definitely changes the dynamic compared to EVs that can take on charge much faster.
And home charging. AC charging.
Standard AC charging is at 7 kilowatts, which means a full charge from empty can take up to 10 hours. Fine overnight, but again, some newer EVs offer 11 kilowatt AC charging, which is noticeably quicker. Another practical point raised, linked to charging, is the charge port location.
Where is it?
It's at the front of the car, which, especially in markets where reverse parking into charging bays is common, can be pretty inconvenient.
Right, you might have to park nose in.
Exactly. And depending on the charger layout and cable length, that can be tricky or sometimes impossible. Cars with side or rear ports often work better with those setups.
Okay. Let's move back inside. Beyond the stylistic weirdness, any actual irritating quirks mentioned?
Oh, yes. Those guitar strings on the door bins.
Yeah, annoying.
Might look fun at first, but several sources and owners said, yeah, they can be annoying. Especially if you put bottles or other things in there, they rattle or just get in the way.
Okay, minor maybe. Anything more significant?
Yes. This one came up multiple times and seems like a big comfort issue. Absolutely no lumbar support adjustment on the front seats.
None at all. Not even on top trims.
Apparently not. It's just not available.
And combined with that bouncy ride you mentioned at higher speeds.
Exactly. That lack of adjustable back support could really impact comfort on longer journeys. Potential for backache.
Ouch. Any other interior niggles?
A few smaller things. Rear seatbelts can snag easily because there are no guides to hold them tidy. Some plastics, away from the main touch points, feel a bit scratchy. The door handles have an unusual action pulling down or outtakes getting used to.
And practical annoyances. Things getting dirty.
Yes. The boot release button and the reversing camera are placed quite low down. Sources report they get covered in grime very easily in bad weather, meaning dirty fingers opening the boot or a useless blurry camera view when reversing.
And no washer for the camera.
Nope, no washer system mentioned. Plus, the USB ports are apparently very low down and awkward to reach. And one long-term owner described the cup holders as both too deep and too small for typical drinks.
Lots of little things adding up there. What about software? Glitches? Limitations?
Yeah, the infotainment, while responsive, has its quirks. We mentioned CarPlay forcing landscape and hiding climate controls, a definite faff. Also, no rain sensor for the wipers, just basic intermittent settings, which isn't great in changeable weather.
Okay. Anything more serious reported?
Well, there was one potentially serious point mentioned in one source. Needs careful handling. It involved a report of a freak accident scenario where a car apparently accelerated during a driver swap while auto hold was on.
Auto hold, that holds the car still, right?
Yeah. Now, it's important to say a test on a different BYD model, the Sea Lion, showed that car correctly parking itself immediately in that situation. So this might be a specific isolated report related to the Atto 3, but based on that source, it's something to be aware of as a reported potential issue.
Understood. A reported incident, not necessarily widespread. Okay, other software feedback. Updates.
One long-term owner mentioned getting very few software updates, only 2 in 18 months, they said. Meaning newer features seen on later BYD models aren't filtering down to their Atto 3.
Frustrating.
Yeah. And the built-in sat-nav isn't rated as the most intuitive, especially for planning routes with charging stops included. And multiple sources mention the voice control system just activating randomly, even when no one's talking to it, which sounds incredibly irritating.
Oh, that would drive me mad, right? Finally, NVH, noise, vibration, harshness. It's an EV. Should be quiet, right?
Quieter than a petrol car, yes. But reviewers did note significant wind noise at higher speeds, like above 60 or 70-mile-an-hour.
How significant?
One reviewer vividly compared it to being in a caravan in a storm. That's quite an image.
Yeah, it doesn't sound serene.
And there's also that mandatory pedestrian warning noise at low speeds, under 15-mile-an-hour. That constant eerie hum or alien spaceship sound. Some drivers found it persistently annoying.
Wow. Okay, that's a lot to consider when you dig past the initial impressions. So, pulling all of this together from your sources, what does it really mean for someone new to cars, maybe thinking about the BYD Atto 3 as their first EV?
Well, the sources paint a pretty clear picture, I think. On one hand, you've got a car that offers genuinely compelling value for money. It comes packed with standard kit, the interior is surprisingly well built for the price, and definitely unique. You get cool tech like that great camera system and the swiveling screen. And it is described as comfortable and easy to handle, specifically around town. Those are big ticks, making EV ownership feel more accessible.
But the compromises.
Exactly. Your sources make it abundantly clear that this value comes with definite trade-offs, particularly once you leave the city limits. The driving dynamics get less polished at speed. That bouncy ride keeps coming up. Charging is noticeably slower than key rivals, meaning potentially longer waits. And real-world range might be less than you hope for, especially if you live somewhere with proper winters.
And then all those smaller quirks and potential frustrations we just discussed.
Yeah, from the design annoyances like the guitar strings or the dirty camera to the comfort issues like no lumbar support and the software things like the random voice control or the CarPlay limits.
So for someone new to this car, maybe new to EVs altogether, understanding these specific trade-offs is absolutely crucial before buying. You need to weigh it up. Are the upfront savings, the unique interior, the features list worth accepting that less refined drive at speed, the slower charging, and dealing with those specific, potentially frustrating quirks day to day? It really depends on how you plan to use the car.
Absolutely. We've taken a deep dive into your collection of sources on the BYD Atto 3, really trying to pull out the key pros and cons highlighted by reviewers and owners.
And it's clear, isn't it? The Atto 3 presents a very attractive package initially. Makes EV ownership look more achievable for many with that price and the standard features.
But yeah, this deep dive has also really shown a light on the specific areas where it falls short compared to some competitors. Especially driving dynamics outside the city, charging performance against newer rivals, and those distinct usability quirks that came up again and again in the feedback.
So for someone considering their first EV, maybe looking closely at the Atto 3, understanding these specific points we've dug into is vital. Things like the potentially bouncy ride at speed, the slower charging, the definite lack of lumbar support impacting long trip comfort, that possibly annoying random voice control, the front charge port inconvenience. Knowing about these things helps you judge if it truly fits your needs, your expectations for daily use, and longer journeys.
And here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Given how fast the EV market is moving, new competitors popping up all the time around this price point. How much do these specific drawbacks and quirks we've highlighted actually matter to you compared to the Atto 3's undeniable appeal on price and features? Is that value proposition strong enough for you to overlook the performance limits and those usability frustrations that people have shared in your sources?
Something for you to mull over.